on the 5th of April of 2003. We're driving a Humvee through a city called Karbala when the front left tire of the Humvee that I was driving ran over a roadside bomb. Where your focus goes, your energy follows. And so my energy was consumed with those thoughts that my life is over. So everyone was happy that I'm alive, yet I felt I was the only one that was really thinking about the fact that I'm never going to live. And there's a difference between being alive and actually living.
Resilience and acceptance are transformative qualities that can help us overcome even the greatest challenges. Our guest today embodies these qualities in every aspect of life. J.R. Martinez is an Army veteran, burn survivor, actor, motivational speaker, New York Times bestselling author, podcast host, and Dancing with the Stars season 13 winner. JR has traveled the world speaking with troops at various bases and has served as a keynote speaker for numerous Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, associations, and universities. He's devoted himself to spreading his message of resilience and optimism. JR, I'm stoked to have you on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Appreciate it, Danny, for having me. We talked about this offline, and I just feel like it's important for me kind of on the record to say this. I just want to credit you, man, for, taking your experiences and then creating this platform. I think it's needed, and you can't have enough people out there, getting the word out and get the message out. But listening to that bio, man, it's too long. Like, even that's the abbreviated one that you read. And I'm like, I think I need to simplify this and maybe kind of just say, J.R. Martinez is like the real life Forrest Gump, and we'll figure this all out in the next hour or so that we're talking, because I feel like that's how my life has been. And I know we're going to get into it, but I mean, my life has legitimately been a lot of where I am today and what I've done has truly been because I've listened. Other people have come to me and suggested, you should try this, you should try that, you should think, have you ever thought about this? And I've always, of course, human nature in a lot of ways has been like, no. One, I can't do that. No. One, I don't want to do that. No. What are you talking about? You're crazy. And then, in a world that is so driven on data, right? We're all, you talk to any organization, they're like trying to gather data, trying to understand their product, trying to understand their client, their consumers. I mean, everyone's trying to gather data. And the one thing that I had to, at some point in my life, had to identify is me. I am a brand. Me, myself, J.R. Martinez, I am a brand, and I have to accumulate data as well. No different than any other organization. The only difference is I'm just a one-man organization, but needless to say, like, I still need to be gathering data. And the more that I leaned into these things and said, fine, I'll try it. Guess what? The evidence, the data showed and supported that, hey, these things work out. These things work out. And whether it works out in the short term or whether it's a long term, something where you learn a lesson in that moment and that experience, and then over the long term, you ended up putting it all together. But it works out somehow. And just truly based on that has allowed me to really always I'm always like this dude. Like, I'm naturally a curious individual. So you put that data and that evidence with somebody who's already curious. I mean, I'm constantly like, tell me more. What do you mean? Like, let's unpack that, right? Like, I am leaning into this stuff, man. So it is great to be here with you, man. And I just love to hear these stories of, individuals like yourself that has taken your years in the military and your experiences post and now trying to create a platform, which I'm sure is helpful for you, but I know it's really helpful to a lot of people. So thanks again, man.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure. And you're right. This is incredibly helpful. The brand that we're building here at 1 Mile, 1 Veteran, to get people walking, to get them tracking the progress that they've been making over an accumulative amount of time. Because when we look back over our lives, it is this laundry list of potential accomplishments as well as setbacks. And so often people get stuck in the mindset of setbacks, especially when they're in the midst of a struggle, right? Like when we're in the thick of it, all we could see is the negative. But having that list of the accolades of the stuff that we did, we're just like, I can look back and go, I am a world champion. Oh, I have completed several marathons. Oh, I've done Spartan races. Oh, I've traveled the world with my wife. But when I'm in the midst of a struggle, all I can think about is that struggle, and this is how life's going to be. And so like when we sit here and we put this platform, we ask people, track your walks on the Strava app, see your progress as you go along, be a part of this community. And for our listeners, turn on your Strava app, start the tracking, because it is a part of a community. You are there to be supported by one another. And also I want you to be able to look back. I mean, last year I started tracking my stuff in Strava app when I was 240 pounds, and I could barely complete that mile walking around Athens, Greece. And now, right before this interview, I completed a 5.7 mile run in under an hour, took a shower, hopped on here at 6 a.m., and we're having a chat.
And you're not even panting or still sweating. If I went for a run right now, man, and I showered and jumped on right now, I'd be like, oh, yeah, man. Like, won't you keep talking, Danny? Give me a second. Granted, I'm bald, so like the sweat just kind of comes from all over the place, but I'd probably still be sweating from my forehead somehow. But no, man. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it's about, tricking the brain and forcing the brain to think of something else. And, when I do my speaking engagements, one of the things that a lot of people like to use is I have like this little montage kind of hype video. And I created it honestly because I was like, man, there's people out there that are reading bios and they're not getting the energy up the way that I like to when I take the stage. And I'm a high energy guy. So I created that as a way for people to like, yeah, read the bio, but like cue the video. The video is going to keep people hype and everything and get them excited. But it's one of those things I had to learn as well. I've accomplished a lot, and I still have these moments when that video is playing, which is probably like 2 minutes, and it's showing all these things that I've done. It has these different sound bites in it. And as I watch it for a long time, I get really uncomfortable. I'm like, just hurry up and finish already. Like, I hurry up and finish video. Like, it's just uncomfortable. Like, it's just like, oh, look at me. It felt very uncomfortable for a long time. And, I finally had to get to a point where I had to really sit down and identify what is it about that affects me? Why, like, not just ignore it and just, learn to deal with it. No, like I had to get to the root of it for me. And sometimes I think a lot of it, what I've identified is that, not that it's like this word gets thrown around a lot, or these two words, but imposter syndrome, right? I don't feel like I suffer from that. I think there was a point in my life where I did. And, I'd find myself in these spaces, in these circles and these conversations. And I'm like, I don't know what the hell people are talking about. I feel so lost. And I was 32 years old. And finally at that point, I decided, I was like, I'm going to go to college. Cause I think, one, that's been a goal of mine. Two, I think it's a great way for me to learn about some things, and then I could be part of these conversations. And I think that once I started to, get more comfortable and gaining more knowledge around things, that level of insecurity and attention on me, and it sort of went away, sort of diminished on some level, right? But that's getting too deep into it right now. I mean, for me, the reason what I was really saying was like when I watched that video, even myself, I have these moments where I'm like, man, I have done that. Like I have done that. Oh, wow. And I've done that. But we're so conditioned as human beings that we have to have that thing figured out. And whatever the time frame is for you, it's 6 years, it's 12 years, it's 15 years from now, it's when you're 70, like you have to have life figured out. It's the reason we go up to kids and we can't just be like, hi, what are you doing? What's your name or what's your favorite color? No, we got to be like, what's your name? What do you want to be when you grow up? Like we're so conditioned that we're now stressing children out. And I think that when we find ourselves in a space in our lives and our journey where there's a lot of road work that's being done, right? It's not the smoothest ride. There's maybe detours you have to take. Maybe there's some waiting you have to do, and nobody likes to sit there and wait. I think it's a great opportunity to do exactly what you said is watch that video of your life. Watch that 2-minute video of your life and say, wow, you know what? I've done a lot of things. I've come a long way. And that has been honestly one of the secret ingredients for my life, is that when things feel unpredictable and there's change happening, which we all know is inevitable, but when things start to kind of shift and I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? I've identified that the biggest thing that I need to do is pause and just sit with myself, reflect, and then I need to practice gratitude. So I need to shift my mindset. And this is something I learned shortly after I was injured. I started to overwhelm myself with the thought that I'm never going to be able to walk amongst normal people, that I'm never going to be able to get a job. I was 19. I'm never going to meet somebody and have a family, have kids. Like I'm never going to have those things. And I put so much energy into that. And where your focus goes, your energy follows. And so, needless to say, like that's where my energy was consumed with those thoughts that my life is over. So everyone was happy that I'm alive, yet I felt I was the only one that was really thinking about the fact that I'm never going to live. And there's a difference between being alive and actually living. And there was a point in my life where all I was doing was I was just alive. I wasn't really living. And I think all of us go through that on some level. And you need to go through that. And one of the things that shifted my mindset and allowed me to sort of really understand, okay, this is something that's really helpful for me, is I had to completely eliminate figuring out what life was going to look 6 months from that point, 3 months from that point, let alone years from that point. I had to simplify it. And what I did is I let go of those long-term goals and dreams and pressures. I let go of that stuff. I just said, forget it. It's irrelevant to me right now. The only thing that matters to me right now is today, this moment, right now. What can I focus on that I felt like things have improved for me? Things have gotten better for me. What can I focus on? And in the midst of me going through my recovery, trust me, there's a lot of things that were going well for me. There would be one day where I couldn't pick up a fork and feed myself, but the next day I can actually hold the fork a little bit more. One day I did, maybe half a lap of my ICU room because I wasn't allowed to get outside of my room for 3 months because of infections and stuff. But the next day, maybe I was able to do a full lap, right? Like there was always something. And in some cases, I had to trick my mind to find something positive. Like I had to literally trick my mind to find something positive. And what that did is it just sort of eliminated the pressure and the focus on, oh my God, my life is going to be this. Instead, my focus went to there's something beautiful that happened today. My energy followed. It just marinated on that. And I still practice that till this day, man. I mean, it's still something I frequently do when I'm like, oh my God, it sucks. Like us people on my team or this opportunity or whatever. And I just, hey, take a step back. And so, I think all of us, as much as we're conditioned to always look forward, as they say, never look back, I think it is important every now and then to kind of take a glance back and, really reflect and be proud of yourself because you've done a lot of badass things that in the pressures and pace of life, we never really give ourselves an opportunity to sit and just breathe and connect. And that was something that I learned, honestly, when I was going through it, man.
You've alluded to it several times. I know 2003 seems like such a long time ago, and you've had so much opportunity to learn, right? You've had so much opportunity to grow since then and figure it out. For our listeners that are unfamiliar with your story and your journey, would you mind sharing a little bit about what happened in 2003 that led you to this journey of self-discovery?
Yeah. So I was fresh out of high school. I was 19 when I joined the Army. I went out to basic training for 3 months, graduated basic, ended up getting assigned to my unit, which was the 101st out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And the reason I start there is because I want people to understand this timeline. So September of 2002, I joined. I go to basic training immediately. I'm there till December 2002. January of 2003, I report to my unit, which was the 101st out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I'm a 19-year-old kid, man. Like I'm incredibly naive. I always tell people, it's like, I raised my right hand and I understood that war was a possibility. I mean, because we were currently at that time at war, right? We were already in Afghanistan and there are rumors of us possibly going somewhere else. But as a young 19-year-old, you understand everything's a possibility, but you never think it's going to happen to you. Why would it happen to you? You're living your life, right? You're indestructible. Like you're strong, you're a kid, you're capable, you're out in the world, free, whatever. And I remember one day my platoon sergeant coming up to me and he said, Martinez, we need to talk. And he said, Martinez, you need to be prepared. We're going to deploy sometime soon. And this man was not referring to physically. He was referring to mentally be prepared. And I was like, Sergeant, I'm good. I'm good. And sure enough, he knew what he was talking about because 2 months later, I was on the plane in March of 2003 at the age of 19 years old, flying overseas, going to combat with no extensive training, no real experiences. And the only thing that I could do is look around at aircraft and everybody that was in my unit and just say, I just got to follow these guys. These guys know what they're doing. These guys have been deployed before, whether it's to a war situation or just somewhere overseas, just an unfamiliar territory. And I found myself, I mean, just following them. And that was 6 months after I joined. And a month of that was me going home after basic training for convalescent leave because it was the holidays. So really 5 months of really being in uniform. And, I get overseas and, obviously the conflict begins and, you found yourself, I mean, I was an extra guy. I was a private in the Army. So you just kind of do whatever is asked of you. And a lot of my job was driving. And so, it was no big deal, routine stuff. You always had convoys and whatever. And then one day on the 5th of April of 2003, we're driving a Humvee through a city called Karbala when the front left tire of the Humvee that I was driving ran over a roadside bomb. And I could get into so much detail about that day, and get into so much detail about what transpired for the next, which of course to me felt like days, that I was trapped inside of that Humvee, engulfed in flames, screaming and yelling at the top of my lungs, of course. But it was realistically only 5 minutes, and I know 5 minutes isn't really a long time, but when you stop and you stare at the clock, I mean, that was 5 seconds. I mean, how awkward did
Yeah.
that feel for the listener right now? Like, what happened? What happened? Is it buffering?
Did I lose him?
What happened? Where'd he go? Tell us more. But it's like when you really pause and slow down time and pay attention to it, man, godly, a minute feels like forever. And so, I was immediately, this Humvee was engulfed in flames. I was trapped inside. There were three other troops in the Humvee with me, but they were thrown out of the vehicle. And it's important for me to say this. They all walked away with minor physical injuries. I was the one that, physically sustained more injuries. They emotionally and mentally had a different wound than I did, because they had to hear, they couldn't get to me right away. And they had to hear one of their guys, literally screaming and yelling, fighting for his life. And man, I was trapped inside of this Humvee and I can see my hands. The way that I was trapped, the only thing I could see was my hands. And if you're watching this on video, you can see that my hands are grafted full thickness. So, they're changing pretty drastically. And as much as I can get into so much detail about those next 5 minutes and what I saw and what I remember, I think the most important thing to really focus on in those 5 minutes is there were several instances where my eyes would get really heavy and I'd be on the verge of, my eyes would be on the verge of closing. And whether you've been in the military or whether you just had a long day, you're sitting on the couch and you're trying to watch this show or this game and you're like this, but you're really fighting that. And eventually your eyes win and you end up closing your eyes. And I remember that I was just screaming and yelling, gasping for air, oxygen. And then my eyes would close. And in the midst of my eyes being closed, suddenly I didn't hear the chaos, the noise. I didn't feel the pain. The only thing the two things that I connected with, one was my breath. Like I could hear and feel myself breathing. The second thing was my thoughts. And my thoughts were like, I'm going to lose my life. I'm going to lose my life in this way, in this place, at this age. And then I would tell myself, you can't keep your eyes closed. If you keep your eyes closed, that's it. You're giving up. I literally had those conversations with myself, which probably only existed a few seconds, right? But of course, it feels like forever. And I would force myself to open my eyes and continue to like just scream and fight and hang on. And I did that, I mean, several times over the course of those 5 minutes that I had to just talk to myself and then connect with my breath. So 5 minutes later, I was evacuated. I was pulled out of Humvee, started the medevac process, ended up in a local medic station set up in Iraq where they put me into a medical induced coma. From there, they took me to launch stool, which is essentially the path that a lot of service members, take. And went into emergency surgery when I was there. And after 3 days, once I was stable, they put me on the plane and brought me back to the United States. And the biggest thing at the time was not that was threatening whether I was going to survive or not was not the physical wounds. It was all the internal stuff, which if you really think about life, I mean, we talk about this conversation about mental health. It's like the stuff on the inside. Like all the smoke I inhaled, that was essentially the thing that was threatening whether I was going to survive or not. And, 3 weeks later, came out of my medical induced coma, learned about my new, norm, my new reality. And for the next 2.5 years, just was in a hospital recovering. But before I, kind of toss it back over to you, for a very long time after I was injured, and rightfully so. It's this is natural, and I don't want people to think that we should not be putting timelines on people, how they respond to and cope with their trauma and what their experiences. I think that's also setting people up for failure. Everyone has their own process. Everyone has more experiences than others. And, it just takes, everyone's different. And that's what makes us really cool and interesting, is that we're all unique. And so for me, for a very long time, when I would think of the 5th of April of 2003, I would literally focus on my hands changing. I would focus on what I felt on my face. I would focus on what I felt on my body. That was what I focused on. And then when I really started to do a lot of the work, and through therapy, through conversations with my best friend, which we'll get into later, with me really sitting with myself on the top of a mountain in Colorado Springs, right outside of Colorado Springs in Pueblo. I'd go there with a group of vets, and I'd ride a horse sometimes at this guy's property, and ride a horse or a four-wheeler, or up to the top of the mountain, and just let the sun set and just sit up there and just watch and just kind of feel like, man, life, and just really resonate on it. Over all that work that took years, I finally got to a point where I was able to look at the 5th of April and not focus on the burns on my body and the pain that I experienced. Instead, I focused on the moment when I would close my eyes, and how in that moment I would talk to myself and I would connect to my breath. And to me, that's something I still do to this day. We don't spend enough time pausing, right? We don't spend enough time sitting with ourselves, connecting with our breath. Our breath is reminding us that we're alive, that we're still in this damn fight. Whatever that fight is, we're still in this fight, because we still have something going through our body. And you don't connect with that if you're doing a lot of talking, or if you're just distracted and looking for distraction. But when you stop for a second and you take those breaths, you're like, But when you stop for a second and you just close your eyes and you connect with yourself and your thoughts and your feelings, and why am I feeling this when this happens? Or why does this happen when this happens? Or when you do that, all of a sudden nothing else exists, right? Like 5 minutes, I was trapped in this Humvee going through this excruciating pain. But when my eyes were closed, I didn't feel the pain. When my eyes were closed, I didn't hear the guys outside of the Humvee. I mean, just chaos outside of the Humvee of them trying to find a way to get to me. I didn't connect with that. I was connected. I was in a peaceful place, believe it or not. And that's what I've been able to extract from the 5th of April of 2003, is that really awesome, beautiful seed and reminder that has been planted in me, that even now, despite all the things that I've done, it's been 21 and a half years since that day, that I still practice that as a husband, as a father, as a entrepreneur, as just somebody in the community, as a friend. I'm constantly finding moments to pause. And sometimes it's in my car when I'm driving. Now I can't close my eyes and I'm doing, I'm doing that. All the way some people drive, you think their eyes are closed, but I disconnect. I go for walks. I don't have to put on a podcast. I don't have to put on music. I don't have to make the call. Let me just give myself this time to walk. Maybe not even run. I love running, but I don't want to run. And I just want to walk right now and just connect, right? And just breathe. Because if I start running, then I'm definitely going to be breathing, because I'm out of shape right now, bro. And so, so I spent 2.5 years in a hospital recovering, man. I don't even know the number anymore, but I think the bio stopped at one point counting how many surgeries I've had, but I've had well over 35. And from full thickness grafts to cosmetic stuff, releases, I mean, you name it. And so, it was a period of my life that I've realized that the military was never really intended to be part of my long-term journey. Someone recently said something to me. They said, your environment can change your DNA. And I remember when this person said this to me, I was like, I just really thought about it. And what I really thought about was this. And I'm just going to kind of give you a quick rundown of younger JR prior to the military. So I was always this personality where high energy, friendly, talkative, curious. I was always that kid. I was born that way, smiling all the time. That's who I am. That's who I was. And, when I look at my 3-year-old son right now, I'm like, that's me. There he is. I can see my younger self in him, because he's that personality. He's super emotional. That's me. I was like, there he is. And so, I remember my father left when I was 9 months old. He wasn't in my life, and my mother had experienced a lot of trauma prior to having me, and life just continued to pile stuff on top. And my mom would fall into these relationships that weren't the healthiest relationships, verbally, emotionally, physically. And but I remember when I was probably around 5 years old, she was dating this guy that was probably the only closest thing I ever had to what I called a dad, as far as a guy in my life. And he would sit down and he would play the piano in the living room. And he would sing these Spanish love songs because my father's from Mexico, my mother's from El Salvador. I am Hispanic, and Spanish was my first language. And I would sit next to him and I would just look up at him and watch him. And then I would start singing these Spanish love songs with him. What the hell did I know about love or anything at 5 years old, right? But I would sing them. And there was this hole in the wall bar down the street from where our apartment was that occasionally he'd go down there and perform. And there was a couple times he took me down to this bar, and I would literally 5 years old dancing and singing these Spanish love songs in front of all these people that are heavily intoxicated. And they're like, he's the greatest. He's the best. That's how people end up on American Idol, or, and then, you get on there and Simon's like, who told you should be here? Like, well, these heavily intoxicated people at this bar said I was great. And I was like, well, I'm not intoxicated and the crowd isn't intoxicated. So we're going to be honest with you. But here I am, like, performing and singing and doing all this stuff. And I just loved it. It was great. It was awesome. Now, my DNA says that that's who I am. That's who I'm destined to be, that person. But there were all these things over the course of my youth where, listen, I believe in vulnerability. I've learned what vulnerability feels like, not just necessarily what it means. We talked about this before we went on. So I think it is important for me to completely be transparent with you and your audience. So at 9 years old, we relocated to Arkansas. My mom had a better job opportunity there, so we moved there. That was a difficult place. At this point, my mother was a hurt person hurting people. And what I mean by that is my mom did the best that she could, and I love her. And I never really focused on the hardships, but the hardships are part of my journey. Part of when people say, you're so resilient. I'm like, resiliency isn't a light switch that, like, my wife and my daughter go into a room and turn it on and then never turn it off. And I'm always going behind them, turning all the lights off, But that's why I have sensors now, in the house, when you walk into a room, it's just clack,
like, we have the opposite problem here. We walk around in the dark all the time.
I like it. I like it, man. I like it. Maybe I should send my wife and my daughter to live with you guys and kind of like get adjusted to that and be okay with the darkness a little bit. But, my mom had a lot of difficult things that happened to her in her life. And, I was a typical kid, just kind of getting into trouble about silly things or whatever. And my mom had so much pain in her heart, so much. And I was the only consistent thing in her life. And there'd be times, man, my mother, and mind you, this is the old school way of, the way, people, spiritually parented, where, they put their hands on you, right? And, you talk to anybody my age or older and they're like, yeah, let's talk stories and share stories about when your mom and my dad and, whatever, they whooped
Get the switch.
Ass. Yeah, along a switch, chased you around the neighborhood and all that's cool. But my mom, because my mom was a hurt person, my mom really put her hands on me. To the point where, listen, man, there would be marks on my body. And the guy she was seeing at the time, he put his hands on me. And I remember my uncle one time, my mother's brother, he was staying with us for a short period of time. And one day he interjected and he said, stop, you're going to kill that boy. And I remember I was probably around 11 years old. And one day my mom was hitting me, because then my mom, it just progressed from switches to like belts to then it progressed to like my mom literally buying like a rope and my mom hitting me like beating me, man, with a rope. And I remember my mom, like, I was on my back on the ground and looking up and my mom's over me. And I remember looking into her eyes and just thinking to myself, like, there's nothing there. Like, my mom's completely like blacked out. Like she is so angry, and it's not even about me. Like, I remember thinking that at that age, like, it's not even about me. Like, she's displacing all this stuff that's happened over X amount of years of her life and throwing it onto me in this particular moment. She's just so mad and a hurt woman. And you know, I would go to school and I was conditioned because my mother, like, that's my mom. And no matter what, like, that's my environment. And I just, as much as some people say you shouldn't be in that space, but I'm like, why would I leave? Where would I go? And I just stayed in it, man. And I would go to school and change and gym, and I would change secretly so no one can see this stuff. And then, of course, other people get involved. Um, I was jumped a lot, man. I was a lone wolf, and kids were always trying to come up to me and, pick on me because they saw me by myself, and I'd just get my ass kicked for no reason. And, I'd get suspended from school a lot just because I was fighting. And I just finally became this shell. Like, I was just alive. I wasn't living. And I was just going through the motions, and to the point where I was around 16 years old. And one day my mom came into my room, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed and I was crying. And I said to her, sometimes I think about getting into a car accident just because I want to find out how many people would show up at the hospital. I mean, that clearly tells you that I felt completely disconnected. And the only thing I was looking for, which I think all of us are, is a community. I wanted a community. I wanted to feel like I was part of something. And that community sometimes is in your own home, right? Is whether it's just you and a parent, whether it's you, a parent and a sibling, whether it's you, both of your parents and your siblings, whether, whatever it is, your grandparents, whoever's your guardian, whoever's in that circle, to where maybe hopefully it expands outside of your home to friends at school, to your educators, to church groups, to sports teams, whatever it is, coaches. And I just was craving that, man. And, ended up moving right before my senior year of high school, which was a great move for me. Moved to Georgia and found a community of people. And, my mom, I witnessed a lot of things, a lot of hardships. A lot of challenges. And I believe that was where I developed a lot of the resiliency, where I'd been conditioned for a very long time, whether I realized it or not. Like, I had been exposed and put through it. And later on in life, I was really able to reflect and look back and understand that a lot of the things that I'm struggling with is not even truly related to what happened to me overseas. Yes, there's a dynamic of it, of course, but the match that essentially lights all of this trauma is what happened to me overseas in Iraq. But what I'm really navigating and dealing with is a lot of the stuff that happened to me prior to my military career. And that's when I really started to understand that. And I had to really lean in and do that work.
What you're talking about, that compounded trauma, because so many stories of military members. The reason why, as I'm listening to your story, I'm not flabbergasted. I'm not taken back by it. It's similar to so many stories of military service members. You had mentioned in our pre-interview discussion about the military being an escape for a lot of people. It's a way out of a lifestyle. For me, I can't say like it was an escape, but at the same time, like going to Afghanistan definitely was. I fled from my home. Like, I joined the military because I knew that I was going to join the military. I didn't think about it, kind of like yourself, like didn't think about the consequences of this decision. The childhood, very similar in terms of traumas from various moves. Single mom, mental health conditions. She did the best that she could, and eventually through the work, I came to discover like my mom was a young 20-something without the resources and support to recover. And it's not to make an excuse for somebody that put us in danger, but it's to gain a new perception of what she was going through.
Yeah.
But again, that took years and years of consistent work and really trying to engage in right relationship with my mom, because I always wanted to honor her. Yep. I was always taught by my stepmom and my dad, love your mother no matter what. You only get one. And even though it may hurt at times, it's still our responsibility to be in control of how we respond to the situations, because things aren't necessarily happening to us. Maybe they did at one point.
Yeah, it helps humanize them, right? And it helps you look at them as a human being. There's this dude that his name is Caleb Campbell, and he's from Texas, big sports dude, and in high school. And, there's some challenges there with his mother as well. And he ended up joining the military, played ball at West Point, and then, tried to break into the league. He's a cool guy, sharp guy. And I heard his story years ago. And then oddly enough, I live in Austin, and oddly enough, one day I'm at a restaurant in my neighborhood, it has outdoor seating, and I go sit down, and I'm like looking, I'm like, why does that guy look familiar? And finally, at one point, I walk up to his table. I was like, "Excuse me, man, are you Caleb?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like, dude, like I heard your story, blah, blah. So we ended up having a conversation and, connecting and stuff. But he said something to me that I thought was really, it still sits with me to this day. And what he did is that I'm sure like some people, like my mom, as an adult, my mom would call me because my mom would just go down this rabbit hole of all the things in life and negativity and the hardships and life's against her and all those things. And again, I validate a lot of it, but it got to a point where when her name would pop up on my phone, I'd just be like, oh, I'd get this feeling in my stomach. It made me feel uncomfortable. And there's a book that I read years and years and years ago, and I'm looking up right now because I know I have it. I just don't know where the hell it is. But it's called Walking on Eggshells. And I remember reading that book in my late 20s, early 30s. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, that really resonates with me because I remember the feeling of when I would come home from school and I would literally like walk into the house and kind of feel it out. And you can sense it. You understood she's not in a good place. And I was always walking on eggshells. And that wasn't obviously a healthy place to be in, right? Because it's almost in a lot of ways like a lot of the military. You go to a combat environment and you're always like, where's the enemy, right? Where is it coming from? And you're conditioned to always like be guarded like that way and navigate your day and your environment that way. And then you come home and guess what? You're still like that. And so I learned that as a young child and I brought that into my adult life where I was always like walking on eggshells. I always had to please. I always had to make people happy. I was always looking for. And so what Caleb told me he does with his mom, he actually changed the photo for her caller, her contact, and he changed it to her as a child. Because he said then when the call comes in, he looks at that little girl and he realizes that's the last time that she was able to be pure and innocent and free and loving life and happy and all those beautiful things that unfortunately life has taken away from her. And so he's able to answer the phone and now get on the phone with his mom. And it takes away that element of like dread of that okay, she's going to go down and pull me down this. And I remember like, wow, like that is so powerful. And so that's what you're saying is like, you're able to like humanize these individuals and say, okay, I'm not going to validate what they've done, but at the end of the day, I can humanize them a little bit and understand that all these circumstances have really contributed to them doing what they've done. But you're able to, hold some space of love and gratitude and respect for them. And, and my mom did a lot of great things for me, despite those hardships. And, my mom, I mean, I was always looking for acceptance. And part of that came from my mom. I was always looking in my adult life. I was always looking for someone to say thank you because my mom would hardly say thank you. My mom would never apologize. My mom actually believed that if you apologize to your children, you lose power over them, and then they take over the house. And I would like, what are you talking about? You're wrong in this scenario, though. And she never did. So now, like, I'm very conscious with my kids to be like, I'm sorry, like I was wrong. I made that mistake. But my mom also like messed me up in the sense of where my mom did something really powerful to me when I was a kid. And what she did is in two different situations where she was not in favor of me wanting to move right before my senior year of high school. And then the second one was when I wanted to join the military. She was not in favor of neither one of those things. But I remember sitting down and saying, Mom, here's what I think. Here's the plan. Here's why I think these things would be great for me. And despite her putting her foot down and saying, no, you're not doing that, instead, she sat down and she listened to me. And I think that's something that we don't do a lot of, right? We don't do within any organization that we're a part of, organization of our families, whether it's with our kids, whether it's with our spouse, our partners, whatever, whether it's in our job. We have a tendency to be like, hey, I've said what I've said, it's over. Instead, just sit down and listen. And my mom did that for me. And all that did is empowered me, man. It really allowed me to, like, my mom will listen to me. And my mom did. And I hate to just make it sound like she was this horrible monster. She wasn't. She just had these moments. And so what happened was when I got into the real world, I just assumed everybody was going to listen to me the way my mom did. And then that's when a lot of all of those prior things started to get triggered, where I felt like no one's listening to me. No one gives anything. I feel completely disconnected. I have not found the community that I have been looking for my entire life. And it would just send me spiraling down to when I left the army, man, I was 22. I at this point knew I wanted to be a speaker. I was a huge advocate, speaking out for veterans and their families, and really raising awareness and money for different charities where just I love doing the work, and that was my way of continuing to serve in a different uniform in a different space. And um, but the more that I asked people for opportunities to come and speak, people would just say, "Oh, you're a vet. Just stay in the vet space." Like no one was really listening to me. They were hearing me, not listening. And all that did was trigger all this stuff. It triggered everything. And so what it did is sent me spiraling down to going into that space of like, no one cares, no one's listening, there's no community. I'm never going to have an opportunity. And I started drinking. I became very angry, and I just became this unpleasant kid to be around. I put myself in really bad situations, man, where, drinking, and I would get in my car and drive, and I'm not proud of those things. But, obviously, thank God I didn't hurt anybody else, and I didn't end up hurting myself. But at the end of the day, I put myself in that situation, but I was just a hurt person. And what really changed my life, and just to kind of quickly create an abstract version of this, what changed my life around was I was around 24 years old. So it'd been a couple of years now of me just kind of like pretending I'm good and trying to show up as my best. But then I'd go and get triggered and go into my room and drink and get angry and do all this stuff. And I was traveling with about 4 vets to Indianapolis. We were there for a NASCAR race. It was a partner, and we were raising money. And I'm not a big NASCAR guy, but it was fun to me. It was cool. And the night before the race, we go out to dinner, and of course, we're having dinner and drinks. And then we get in the car and we're driving back, and it's like a 3-seater, this SUV, and I'm in the very back. And the driver, his name is Dan, who is now my best friend, but at the time was not really. He was just somebody that I worked with at this nonprofit who was also a vet, and 17 years older than me. And somebody said something in the car, and I sort of snapped and just kind of made a snarky ass remark. And Dan said to me, "Hey, JR, chill out." That's what he said to me. The simplest things, when you're in a bad space, man, the simplest things can trigger you. And I was like, man, don't tell me to chill out. And then, of course, we started exchanging words as he's driving us back to the hotel. And it escalated to a point where I was like, I want to fight you. And so he's like, oh, okay. So he pulls over. And here I am. I've just completely just turned the corner. I'm enraged. I'm blacking out on some level. Like I am full blown angry, and I'm trying to get out the back seat, the back door of this SUV that we're in. And the other vets who were sitting in the middle row, the second row, they're like, "No, JR, no, no, no." And like one of them was a double amputee, and he's holding on to me by my waist, and I'm just dragging this dude, and this poor prosthetics like pop off, like. So I'm like dragging half of a body, just dragging half of a body. He finally lets go. I get him off of me. He pops his legs back in, and I come around to the driver's side. Well, at this point, Dan had got out of the car. And so I was like, we're about to duke this thing out. We're about to settle this. Well, by the time I got to the driver's side, he got back in the car and he locked the door. And I was so mad, man, that what I did is like, no, we're going to do this. And I remember taking off I was like, I'm going to punch the window, and I'm going to break the window of this car. But even though told you I was blacked out, I still had the conscience to be like, I'm not punching it with my bare hands. So I took my shirt off. I wrapped around my fist, and I started punching the window. Then I was humbled because it didn't break at all. And I was like, damn, that's embarrassing. And so at this point, I was just sort of like, I just used so much energy that I was just like, I was crying, man. And I remember getting back in the car. Dan was like, get back in the car. And I got back in the car, and it was just like this. Just everyone was like, what the hell? And it was silent the whole drive back to the hotel. And at this point, this is like 2:00 in the morning, maybe 3. And I remember we pull into the hotel. He parks, everyone gets out. I get out. I'm starting to walk into the hotel, and I'm just crying and upset. And Dan's still sitting in the car. And he says to me, he puts his window down. I said, Jared, get in the car. And I remember like getting in the car, man. Like, I sat in the passenger seat, and he said to me, he said, man, you need to cry. And and I was like, I don't need to cry. And he's like, yeah, you need to cry. And I was like, man, I'm fine. I don't need to cry. At this point, like, I stopped crying. I was like, I don't need to cry. And he says, man, you've healed physically. You haven't healed emotionally. You need to cry, man. And then before you know it, man, I just started crying. And I just started dumping all this stuff. Like, I mean, stuff that's not even related to my injury, just life, and feeling like the world was against me and no one would listen to me. And, I was constantly being judged and like all this stuff. And at the conclusion of this, it ended with me looking at Dan and telling him, I love you, man. And let me tell you why that was so powerful, because every time, Dan and I had known each other at that point, maybe a couple years. And every time that we would end a conversation, and no, we had known each other for more than that, probably 3-4 years actually. And every time that I ended a conversation with him, whether it was in person or over the phone, he would always end it with, I love you. And I thought it was so weird. I'm like, dude, why are you telling me you love me so much? And I would always be like, all right, bro, talk to you later. Like, because I never had a man say, I love you, right? Like I was never conditioned that way. And so I just thought it was odd. And I remember that literally that night, I was the first one that looked at him and said, I love you. And the reason why, and listen, Dan didn't fight me because Dan was like, I'm going to show up differently for this young man. And young man, because he's 17 years older than me. But I want to create this real quick. I'm 5'9", about 210 right now. Dan is 6'5", 275 pounds. So I'm grateful that he got back in the car and locked the door, because I might not be here today being able to have this conversation with you. And if I am, I'm probably doing it some other way because I'm not able to speak. That dude could have obliterated me if he wanted to. But instead, he chose to show up for me as a human being, as a friend, and say, I'm not going to run away. What this person needs, he's a hurt person. He needs someone just to show up. The difference was, in that moment, I was willing to receive that, accept that, lean into that. And because I was willing to do that, I was able to then like find somebody that has been truly instrumental in my life, man. Is the godfather to my children, is like Uncle Dan, like grandfather Dan. He's my best friend. He's my big brother. He's like a dad. Like he lives an hour away from me. Like he's everything in my life. And through that relationship, I have been able to, like, after that interaction, things started to click for me, man. Like literally all of a sudden, like 6 months later, I got, asked to be in his publication, the 5-year anniversary of the Iraqi war. And it's 2008 at this point. And that's publicity. And then it turns into the All My Children opportunity, where they send out an email. Who sends me the email? Dan says, hey man, they're doing a cast for this veteran, this role, this veteran on All My Children. You should audition. I'm like, dude, you're crazy. And I go and audition. I get the job. Like I'm on the show for 3 years, and then it leads to dancing. And then all these things, literally, that was the moment where it all came together and it all clicked and my life just took off. And, and that's why now, like one of my boys, man, that we met in basic training, he stayed in the military and he, deployed multiple times, the common story of seeing a lot of things, losing some guys and, being a part of some bad stuff. And, we'd be in and out of contact. He would kind of just like isolate himself and, and then one day, a couple of years ago, this is probably, I'm trying to get my timeline right, December of 2020, I want to say. All of a sudden, I wake up one morning and I get a DM on Instagram, on Facebook. I got a website inquiry, all from him. And he's like, I'm just trying to get a hold of you. So I call him right away and he's struggling, man. And literally I talked to him yesterday and he's his life, the way he's turned the corner, and he shows up as a father now, and the way he bettered himself and what he's doing with his life. And even yesterday I had this moment when I got off the phone with him. I was like, talking through some things with him, and I was like, all right, man, I'll talk to you later. I love you, man. And he was like, love you too. And it's just so cool to see like that thing now, that simple act of showing up and telling someone I love you. But I've been able, because of Dan and because of so many other experiences that I've had, the way people have shown up for me, because I've also had to realize and take some ownership that I can't just put it on everyone to just understand how to, communicate with me or what I need from them. I have to, one, understand what it is that I want or need. And I have to be clear about that. I have to educate people on who I am and what I'm capable of, so people don't limit their view of who I am, right? Like, and we're all, if you really think about it, that's what any community, there's so many conversations now about this group of people and this group of people and that group of people. And the one thing all of us want is to be seen, is to be accepted, is to be loved, is to feel like we're part of a community, is to be seen for who we actually are, and not what the eye immediately tells your brain that's who that individual is, or that's what I think that individual is. And I've just been, I've been so fortunate, man, and that I'll sort of wrap this up with this. I'll tell this quick story. I think this story is really awesome. So a few years ago, I get the opportunity to go to Atlanta. I'm a Delta snob. I love Delta. I don't know if you have any
Oh my
airline.
gosh, it's so good.
Okay.
So good. So
I didn't
good.
want you to be like, "What do you mean, man?" Like, Alaska Airlines. I got an Alaska Airlines sponsored, and I'm like, "Oop, let's scratch that." And
Delta has just
post-production.
gone up, 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 up,
There you
and
go.
up in
So
my book.
yeah, I love Delta. Delta, I mean, I'm a Delta guy. And so I get this opportunity where I get to go speak at Delta headquarters in Atlanta to the company. And this is awesome. This is a few years ago. I'm on my way back home and something triggers me on the plane. Boom, just triggers me. Suddenly I'm in this real space. I get off the plane. I don't even tell my wife I landed. I don't call her. I just like, I'm going to go to my car, get in my car. It's a 35-minute drive home. And I'm just going to be with my thoughts and be with myself and figure this thing out. And so, needless to say, I get to the booth where you have to pay to, exit the parking garage. I literally pull up, and if you can, for people that are watching, or I'm going to try to explain this if you're not watching, but I'm just looking forward, and I just hold my hand out the window with the ticket. I don't even look at the attendant, right? All of a sudden, I feel somebody grab the ticket, but they don't take it. So I turn, and finally I look at the person, and it's this, this lady, and we're both holding the ticket. And she says to me, "Were you in a fire?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Were you in the military?" I said, "Yes." She says, "Was most of your body injured?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Can I pray for you?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And she closes her eyes, she doesn't speak out loud. And then all of a sudden she opens her eyes and she starts writing. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to pay. This is the process. Well, then she hands me a ticket, which is not normally what happens. She usually says, "This is how much it is. You see it on the screen. Give me your card." Instead, she hands me a parking, and as she's handing it back to me, I grab it and she says, "Are you familiar with Buddhism?" I said, "No, not really." And she said, "Well, in Buddhism, there is a Buddhist we call Amitabha. And Amitabha represents infinite light, infinite wisdom." And she gives this really beautiful explanation of what it is. And she says, "When I look at you, I see Amitabha." And she gives this explanation of what she sees in me. Well, at that point, then she's like, "All right, sucker, it's, this is the price. Give me your card." And I pay, and sort of metaphor for life, right? You can't leave the parking garage until that little arm comes up, right? You got to pay your dues. And so I pay my due, and my due was this, not the money. My due was me showing up and actually being open and receptive to this complete stranger that I could easily look at from a social status standpoint. I'm a top speaker. This is what I've done in my life. I just left Delta Airlines. Like, why am I going to listen to a lady that is, I mean, probably, I'm not even exaggerating, it was like in her 70s, and has, wrinkles on her body, and is working at the airport parking garage. Like, why would I listen to her? No, life has taught me, evidence I've gathered, data I've gathered over the years, that you have to be open to because it comes from anywhere. And that lady, over the course of that quick, which probably took 90 seconds, if you really think about it, it wasn't a long conversation. It felt that way, just like everything. Because when you're present, everything feels like you're just in it for so long. And so, needless to say, think about it. I had so many opportunities when she said, were you in a fire? I could have said, "None of your business." When she said, "Were you in the military?" None of your business. Was it most of your body injured? None of your business. Can I pray for you? Absolutely not. Are you familiar with Buddhism? No, and I don't care. Let me I've had so many opportunities to shut that conversation down. Instead, life has conditioned me and allowed me to lean in and to be open to that. That lady who no longer works there, that lady, that was the only time I've ever seen her there, gave me something and instilled something in me that has allowed me to get back to my DNA. The DNA that I've always been destined to be, which is this personality that was comfortable being in front of people and loves entertaining people and loves having conversation with people, whether they're intoxicated or not, doesn't matter. I just love people and love this conversation that I get to have with you and everyone else. And life, my environment tried to change my DNA. It tried to get me away from who I was born to be. Instead, people and certain situations and what I've learned and how I show up has allowed me to not only get back to that, but really, really become the person I was destined to be. And so that's why it's no surprise I go on Dancing with the Stars and I'm comfortable dancing in front of 20 million people. I was born for this, man. This is who I am. Like, that's why I'm comfortable jumping on a stage, because this is who I'm born to be. I'm comfortable telling stories because, like, everything that I've experienced is stories. And I just love telling these stories and these experiences. And so it really, I mean, 1 mile at a time. And that element of just really thinking about when you're hitting mile 2, mile 3, mile 4, mile 5, think of the last mile, think of the last 2 miles, think of the last 3 miles. And all you have to be doing in some cases, like everybody's trying to figure out balance in life. And that's the hardest struggle people have right now, is figuring out balance. How do I balance my personal and professional life? And there's a balance as well as to when there's moments in your life where, yes, you need to be thinking about what you want to accomplish 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now. But there's also moments in your life when you need to simplify it and think of now and this moment, and not overwhelm yourself, not put so much pressure on yourself about the future. Focus on this moment, practice gratitude, reflect on that last mile, reflect on what you've accomplished, what you've already done, practice gratitude, and just keep freaking showing up. And if you do that, I guarantee you will be able to accumulate the same data and gather the same evidence that I have, because there's hope and there's optimism. Hope is this thing that you just sort of look and you just like your hope, right? It's self-explanatory. This optimism of things will work out, things will be. That's all evidence-based. That's evidence-based. So I just took off on a rant, dude, and thank you for your patience and just letting me run my mouth, because you know what, Danny? This is who I was born to be, man. A guy that just has long run-on sentences.
JR, like one of the so this has been the most unique interview I've ever done, because you are who you are, and I love it. Like, I love listening to the stories. There was no rambling. There was intentionality with every story you told, and I really appreciate that. And as you were sitting there chatting, and explaining to our audience your path, your journey, and you've detailed it out so many times in so many different places. So, like, I hope our listeners go and listen to your story, buy your book, understand a bit more about who you are, and hear the nitty gritty details of everything that you've gone through, because this interview right here has been such a workshop in acceptance of self, accepting the path that you are on. But more so, when I was listening to your story about your mom, and then I was listening to how Dan treated you, and then listening to the story of the parking lot attendants, it's about accepting others where they're at and not meeting it with hostility or aggression. So when we're accepting our mom, it's telling their bio. Instead of focusing on the negative things that have happened, we can do the highlight reel. I've always felt loved by my mom, regardless of how hard life was growing up. She always tried to have a roof over my house, over our head. She always tried to have food in the house. She always tried to bring us to a good community that she felt was safe and keep us protected. Those are the good things. That's the good bio. And she works really hard at that. When we look at the outsiders that aren't necessarily veterans, they didn't get the training that we get. They don't have access to the healthcare that we have access to. We get access to mental health professionals and stuff like that as disabled veterans. They don't have those same opportunities to learn and invest as much as we do in our self-discovery. And so we have to let them be them for the time that they are. And I absolutely love that. And, I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to answer one more question, because I know that that we're both on a time limit. And I think that this is the most important question that I ask in every episode. We know too many people not making it out of life alive because they're dying by suicide, whether they're active duty service members, reservists, veterans, first responders, doctors, you name it. The gamut runs across the world. Suicide is a global epidemic. Do you have a message of hope for anybody that is currently battling?
Oh, and you're absolutely right. I think the biggest thing, I think people have to, and not to spend too much time on this, but you know, I haven't spoken to my mother in years, right? And the reason why is because when I went to therapy, the therapist said something to me, and she used this words that I never thought I would use with my mother, and she said, "You need to establish boundaries." and and I did. And when I established those boundaries, well, then it didn't feed my mother to go constantly into that place, so she sort of removed herself. Now I have an open heart, I have an open home. She's always free to call my phone, to show up at my house, right, if she chooses. But if she's still going to stay in that space, then I establish boundaries. And the reason I lead there's a reason I lead with that, because my mother did so much for me, as you were talking about yours. My mother did so much for me, and that is the family that I was born into. And what I've learned over the last, you know, 20 years of my life is that the family that you're born into and the people that you end up, calling family, or part of your blood, or part of your ancestry.com, that end up showing up out of nowhere. You're like, where the hell did you come from? I'm your first cousin. I'm like, as long as you're not my kid, like, then we're good. But, but but you have to realize that there are certain people that come into your phase of your life, and they have played different roles. And in some cases, you will have to establish boundaries. At some place, you will have to identify, these people no longer serve me, because they're constantly triggering me and forcing me to go back to this space, doubt, questioning. There's all these things that come into play. I'd say the biggest thing is you can't do this alone. You cannot do this alone. And just because maybe the people you're reaching out to, that you identify as family, you identify as people that are in your circle, just because you feel like you're not getting what you need from those individuals, maybe they're just not equipped at this stage in their life to give you what you need. So then maybe what that means is that you have to look outside of this organization that you're a part of, and say, who else is out there? As I told the story about Dan, there was a reason I told that story, because he was no longer, we're not related by blood. We're not related by anything, but he is my family. He is everything to me. He means the world to me. He is the family, and he's a complete stranger that I've just identified that, and was able to find that connection with. And so I just want people to understand that, listen, I know right now, whatever it is that you're going through, whatever it is, and there's no judgment, whatever it is incredibly heavy and hard to carry by yourself, and to find ways to breathe in his chest that feels like it's collapsing, and all of those things. But continue to find ways to put yourself out there and find connection through other people. Lean into therapy. Don't close yourself off to saying to yourself, well, I only want to talk to a therapist that has been through exactly what I've been through, that has the same exact experiences that I have. No, because you're closing yourself off. Because let me tell you something, if you find yourself talking to someone that has exactly the same experiences, now you could potentially end up getting into a situation where that person is grief hijacking, where that person's immediately now, well, like, yeah, I experienced that too. Let me tell you about my life. And you find yourself, the whole hour you just paid for that person to tell you about what they're gone through, because they've never had the moment to talk about it. Open yourself up to different people. Lean into that. I discovered a lot of these things because of therapy. I'm actually in a place in my life where I'm like, I need to go back to therapy. It's not even about what happened to me overseas. It's not even about my youth anymore. Now it's about, as a father, as a husband, as an entrepreneur. It's other things that have just now come. I can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. Remember, when you're in the military, you can't accomplish a mission by yourself, right? Or any mission. You can't do it by yourself. And so I just want people to, I guess, to just continue to find ways to show up and just be open to the idea that you might have to find some other people and expand that circle of yours. And when you do that, I guarantee you'll find the people that you need, that are equipped emotionally, mentally, in order to show up and be what you need them to be for you.
Well, I truly appreciate that message. Thank you for sharing it. Before we say our goodbyes, please tell our audience where they can find and connect with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, man. I mean, obviously on social media, on all of the platforms, I am JR Martinez is my handle. If you always want to check out the website, there's jrmartinez.com. But man, seriously, thank you. This has been a great conversation. And these are one of those conversations where it's nice to, I log off feeling empowered and feeling happy about, this conversation, and honestly motivated and inspired to continue to go out there and do the work. Because even myself at times, I start to question, like, am I really making a difference? Is it really making an impact? Because you get caught up in that in life. And so thank you for the opportunity, man, and sharing your audience with me. It's been a pleasure today.
Absolutely. This has been absolutely amazing. I appreciate your time here on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast. And for our listeners, remember, you can also catch the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast on Reese Across America Radio, available for you on platforms like iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app.